Every one of us carries a story we don't always talk about. The quiet battles, the heavy days, the moments that cracked us open, and the moments that stitched us back together. We've all stumbled. We've all broken. We've all stood at the edge of something we weren't sure we could come back from. And somehow, through strength we didn't know we had, we rose anyway. Because inside every person there is a spark that refuses to die, a hope that refuses to stay silent, a heart that refuses to give up no matter how dark the night gets. And that's why we're here, to listen, to learn, to witness the courage it takes just to be human. Every soul you hear on the show has walked through something that shaped them, sharpened them, and carried them forward. Everyone has a story. Everyone has a battle. Everyone has a journey. And this is where you come to hear it. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome into Uncle Jimmy's podcast. Today, we're diving into a story that will shake you to the core. In her mid-50s, our guest Alison walked away from everything most people spend a lifetime building. Her home, her beloved horse farm, her career as a school teacher, and nearly every possession that she owned. She and her husband, Dan, sold it all to chase a dream most of us only talk about. Sailing around the world. Dan came in battle-hardened, a U.S. Merchant Marine Academy graduate who had already crossed oceans for years. Alison came in as a land-loving teacher with almost no clue what the sea could do. What followed was not a postcard adventure. It was a violent first crossing that nearly dismantled their boat, left them hundreds of miles from a land with failing rigging, and shattered something deep inside her. She developed a raw, bone-deep fear of the ocean that haunted every rough patch for years. She woke up every morning wondering if today was the day she'd finally quit. 8 years later, they're still out there, having crossed oceans and stepped foot in nearly 50 countries. That fear never magically vanished, but Alison learned how to sail straight through it. Today, she's here to talk about the trauma, the terror, the moments she wanted to break, and what happens when life rips away every illusion of control and forces you to become someone you never knew you could be. Alison, welcome to the show. We're going to dive deep today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I'm excited here. So when you and Dan, right, made the decision to sell the house, the horse farm, and almost everything you owned, what was the exact moment you realized you were burning every bridge behind you? And did part of you already regret it?
I remember that moment specifically. And we had already sold our house, gotten rid of everything. And our last possession was our car. So I had my daughter's old VW Bug because she had moved across to California and we were using that. And then we're just going to sell that. And the day came when we finally had a buyer for it. And the guy got in the car and drove the car off. And then I just frowned and looked at Dan. I went, oh my God, this is real, because now we had nothing left but our boat.
So the boat, right? The boat that you guys had, did you guys purchase that before, or was this something you guys were discussing, or was it just like, hey, we're getting rid of everything, we're going to hop on gonna go?
No, we had a 30-foot CNC that we sailed on. It was Dan's father's boat and the one he grew up sailing in the Chesapeake. And when Dan's father didn't sail it anymore, he bequeathed it to us. So we brought it up the ICW from North Carolina to New Jersey. Actually, we were in a place in Delaware. And while we prepared to do this passage around the world, we did a lot of training. And the person who was our mentor suggested a Tazwell, which is the brand of boat that we have now. And it literally took us 4 years to find it because there's only 50 ever made, and they kept selling before we even got there. So we got our 50-foot Tazwell, and we worked on it for about 3 years before we finally cast off the dock lines.
So you get it ready, right? For 3 years, you're getting it ready for your adventure around the world, right?
Right.
If you don't mind, right, to the listeners, how much does that entail? How much does that cost for you to do all that, to get the boat, to fix it all up? What's the total at the end?
I really have no idea. It came in pretty good shape. So we had to replace a few of the older electronics. And I don't remember which ones we replaced, but it already came with all of the systems needed to go out, because the people actually were living on it up until the moment we bought it. So the only major repair that we made was we stripped the bottom down to the fiberglass and repainted it. And that cost a couple $1,000s, and then a few thousand here or there to update some things. But we did a pretty good job of finding a boat that was ready to go.
That was ready to go. Yeah, that's the big thing, right? That's the cool thing. So you were a school teacher, right, who had lived her entire life on solid ground. What was your single biggest fear that kept you awake the night before you stepped onto the boat for the first time?
I didn't really have any fears before I left. I thought we were ready. I mean, that was a misconception on my part, but I was more excited than anything. And at that time, I didn't really have any fears. I want to say, questioning the really long passages across oceans. That was a little bit of a Like, how am I going to do when I'm out to sea for a month at a time? But it wasn't really a fear thing. It was just more of a question.
Okay. So when you're about to take off, right? Where's the first stop you guys are going to make?
So before we left, my husband made a 10-year plan to get around the world because that's how long I gave him. And our first ocean crossing was supposed to be from New England, Portsmouth, to the Virgin Islands. And that was step one on his little route map, which, just a spoiler alert, we never have gotten to a single place when we thought we would be there, sometimes not even in the same country. Like, that schedule has gone out the window. But unfortunately, we did not make our first passage. As you hinted in my introduction, we got into this perfect storm scenario. I don't know if you've seen the movie A Perfect Storm, but the
Yep.
wind, two fronts were converging, and we had 20-foot waves crashing on the deck of our boat, and it caused $20,000 worth of damage. We did 500 miles and had to go back to shore and ended 10 miles from where we started with $14,000 worth of damage to our boat.
So you start, so $14,000 later, right? Then you're getting back out there you're getting back out there, right? So
Right.
in your head, right, during that storm, what's going on in your head? What are you thinking? Are you panicking that we're not going to make it? Obviously you said 20-foot waves for for a normal person to think, right? 20-foot waves is huge, and here you are on a 50-foot boat. So
Yeah,
what was it
43-foot
like?
boat. It was horrifying, and what made it more horrifying was that we had our dinghy lashed to some teak rails on the bow of our boat, and the waves washed the dinghy through the lifeline of the boat. So it's now dangling on the side of the boat. But the halyard that it was attached to was up at the mast. And as it's pounding against our boat, it's threatening to demast us. So my husband had to put on the jack lines and go up onto the deck of the boat and try to cut it free and try to fix some other things that were happening up there as well. And when he cut that dinghy free and it disappeared in the blink of an eye, I saw how quickly in one wave it went. I'm like, if he goes over, I'm just jumping off the boat and going with him because I am not going to be on this boat alone in this storm. So I was ready to die because I was like, if he goes, I'm going, we're going together. And it was horrifying because when it ripped the dinghy out, it left the screw holes that were in the bow of the boat. The water was going now through those. It was going through the ceiling panels. It was raining down inside our boat. And all the books had come out of the bookshelves. The drawers with all the cutlery, they emptied out. The papers from the books were all over the floor. My herbs that were behind the bungee cord came out. So now there's dirt, books, papers, and cutlery all over the bottom of the boat. And I'm just looking at it going, my God, this is like, like you just can't even imagine. And I just at that point didn't think we were going to make it. I thought death was imminent.
I can only imagine, right? That you're out there, 20-foot waves. Like you said, here's your husband, Dan, who's, courageous enough to be up there trying to free the dinghy, right? And at any point in time, he can go over. At any point in time, right? The wave comes which way, one way and just knocks him off. And,
Well, he is tied he does have safety lines and a safety harness on.
yeah.
But you can also go over with the safety harness on if you break through a rail, and times that's more dangerous because if it's rough enough, you just get dragged underwater and get drowned. So there's this, so it's not a fail safe, but it is a safety measure.
Yeah. So Dan, right? Dan came in as a seasoned Merchant Marine Academy grad, right? Who knew the ocean like his own backyard. Did his confidence ever make you feel smaller, or did it actually make you feel more alone and inadequate when it came to his training?
It was an enigma to me because I don't know how a person doesn't feel fear. I am probably the bravest chicken on the planet. Everything scares me. Loud noises scare me. Lightning scares me. The dark scares me. Like, I'm just a very fearful person in nature. And like one time I'm like just sitting there looking at him and I'm like, have you ever felt fear in your entire life? Has it ever been a time when you've been afraid? And he's thinking about it. I can see the wheels turning, smell the smoke burning. And he goes, well, not really fear, but I was kind of apprehensive when we were on a merchant ship and we were going into the Straits of Gibraltar, and the waves were so big as I'm walking down the deck of this merchant ship, and he's looking down the metal aisleway. He could actually see the boat bending and buckling in the waves, and he thought, well, there's a chance this boat could break apart. And I'm like, oh, so then were you afraid that you have to abandon ship and you would be rescued and you'd be out there? And he goes like, no, it never really crossed my mind. I'm like, it doesn't even count then. Like, really?
So during we're going to go back to, so during that first ocean crossing, right? When the storm nearly dismasted the boat hundreds of miles from land and the rigging started failing, what was that precise thought that went through your mind when you believed you were about to die?
It wasn't like, I'm going to die in the next 5 minutes. It's like, I don't know how we're going to survive this. How are we going to survive this? And I actually just went back into my cabin and buried myself in pillows. And just my coping mechanism was that when the waves would crash on the deck, I could see the water. It would hit so far forward on the boat. I could see the water, white water on both sides of the windows on either side of my room. So I know we were like basically submarining. And I would count. So the wave would go over our boat, and then I'd start counting 1,000, 2, 1,000. And then the timing got less and less and less and less. And then after like 5 minutes, it didn't come back. And that's when I went back up on deck. And I'm like, are we out of the worst of it? And he's like, I think so. And that's when we started talking and having a dialogue. But the man didn't leave the helm the whole time. He didn't
The
leave
whole
it
time
once.
Dan was up there.
Well, other than having to go rescue cut the dinghy free. He just stayed there. He was just battled it all on his own, like the old man in the sea.
I was going to say, So you said that storm, right, broke something in you. And I want you to be brutally honest. What exactly broke? And how long did it take before you could even look at that ocean without panic rising in your throat?
Well, when we turned to go back to shore, because we were going to the Virgin Islands, and we'd just been out for 3 days, we turned the boat, and we got word we had to get off the Atlantic because there was another storm following that one. So we were turning and we were hightailing it for shore. And as the boat turned and the skies were lighter on that side and the waves, it was immediately a better direction to the waves. The whole boat smoothed down. And then a pod of dolphins came and they swam around our boat and they started jumping and playing. And my whole mood lifted. I'm like, this is a sign. Like the moment that we turned, these dolphins came and said, it's going to be okay. So I started to settle down a little bit and I'm like, okay, we're going back. We survived it. I didn't have any thoughts about the future at that point. It's just, I had to see what was going to come next. So we pull into a port in Portsmouth, down near Wilmington, Portsmouth, I think it was. No, that's up north. Anyway, we pulled into a marina to lick our wounds and file our insurance claim for a new dinghy and all the damages. It was Thanksgiving Day. And we met a couple. Here we were telling them our sob story and, all the drama and oh my God. And then they told us their story and it was 10 times worse than our story. And I felt like such a wimp. Everything that they had been through made us seem like neophytes. And I just thought, what a wimp I am. Like, we're back here. The boat did fine. My husband did fine. And I was the only factor in there that didn't do fine. And I knew I had to do something about that. So when we headed back out again to cross the Atlantic, I kept Joanne and Rick in my mind as my heroes. And then every time that the weather started getting rougher than anticipated, I started having panic attacks, PTSD, and I would sweat and I would cry. And I'm like, I can't do this. And I was all ready to give up. We were going to the Virgin Islands and we were pulling to St. Martin. There's 100 boats in this harbor. And Dan drops the anchor and I'm saying to myself, tomorrow's the morning that I'm going to wake up and tell him you got to find crew to cross the Atlantic because I can't do it. But 3 boats away was my mentor, John Kretschmer, that we did our 1,000-mile training passage with. And I had been to all his seminars, read all his books. And he was 3 boats away. And I figure the planet is covered by 80% water. What are the chances out of 100 boats that your mentor is 3 boats away?
Is right there, exactly.
So we call him on the radio. We're like, hey, John, we're 3 boats away. He's like, oh, come over for happy hour. I can't believe you're here. So we go over and there's a couple people on the boat and they're all talking. So finally he turns to me and he goes, so Alison, how's it going? And I'm like, John, it's terrible. We got in this horrible storm and I'm so scared now. So anyway, I tell him the whole story and he starts laughing. I'm like, really? And he's like, do you know how lucky you are? And I said, no. He goes, your boat did fine. Your husband did fine. You're still out here. He goes, do you know how many people would have sold the boat and didn't continue? And he goes, do you know what the chances of ever getting in a storm like that again are like 0? He goes, you are gonna be fine. And he was the only person on the planet that could have looked at me and told me that, and I would have believed him. And it saved our trip.
And it saved your trip. So, just going back to when you were coming out of the storm, right? You said, and when you were coming in, the dolphins, right? The dolphins sort of came alongside the boat. That's just like a sign, right? A sign from above, whether you believe in God, whether you believe in, spirits or just the universe in general, right? It's surreal that here you are almost coming out of the storm and the dolphins are there to greet you and ride alongside you, right? To say, hey, you're okay. But also you get back to land on Thanksgiving, right? What a day to give thanks, right?
Right.
On Thanksgiving, you get back to land and you meet that couple you said that had worse than you guys. And it's just powerful, right? It's like the universe matching up with you. It's like, Thanksgiving Day, the dolphins, and then here you are down, in your mentors 3 boats away.
You know,
right?
it's the whole story of our journey. It happens over and over and over again, and it's undeniable at this point that we're
It's like the
exactly
universe wouldn't let you quit.
yeah, we're where we are when we're meant to be there every single time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just powerful, right? Because here you are on a boat, and it's taking you. You guys have a plan charted, but you end up here, and like you said, your mentor is right there, which is even more powerful. Because the next question I have, right, is how many times did you actually rehearse the conversation in your head where you quit, and what stopped you from saying the words out loud?
Well, I told you when it was the crossing the Atlantic, and every time that the weather started getting rougher, I had these anxiety attacks. I'm like, I was going to tell him, Dan, I'll be happy to fly and meet you after you cross oceans, but I can't cross oceans with you anymore.
Can't do it.
And it was that moment when I met John that he convinced me that I could do it. And the next couple of crossings were great. I mean, they were fine. I did fine. The boat did fine. I had moments where it was rough, but I didn't have the same level of anxiety anymore. I was able to deal with it and say, okay, this is irrational. This is a defense mechanism, and I need to suck it up and, trust in the journey.
See, and I have anxiety myself, so I know exactly how you feel, and it's the small things that take you back there, right? It's, you're still in the boat. I took a boat to school for 3 years here in Boston. I was lucky enough. I went to a private school where I took a small little boat. There was probably about 70 room for 70 people on the boat, but I went to school on an island every day. And I
Okay.
went at 7:30 in the morning. I hopped on the boat and came back at 5:30. It was one of the most magical experiences I've ever had in my life. Living here in the city of Boston and going to school on an island. I
Now,
look
just
back
out of
now, right? Go
yeah,
ahead.
just out of curiosity, what island?
Thompson Island.
Okay, my mom grew up on Deer Island in the middle of Boston
Okay.
Harbor.
Yeah, yeah, right
Before there
there.
was
Yeah.
before there was a bridge, she lived on that island.
Yeah. Nope. Yeah, exactly. I know exactly where it is. I went to school there. It was a boarding school. I didn't board. I took the boat every day, but it was so powerful, right? I look back now, and I'm 41, so I'm still taking things in, right? Like when I was a kid and the experiences that I had, and I look at it like, I thought I was just like every other kid. Like I went to school, and my parents put me through private school my whole life, right? And I look back now, and I'm like, I was just I was so privileged, right? And I never thought of it till I got older and started growing and being able to see things with clarity and all that, right? And it was just powerful because when I was reading your story about the boat and all that, I was like, oh man. We used to do excursions at school, and one of the excursions we had to do was to navigate all the islands in the Boston Harbor Islands as a group. There was 3 boats, and we had enough food for the week, enough water and all that, but we had to ration that all off. We had to make sure we got to each island and step foot on it. It was so
Mhm.
cool to think, and here you are, right? So for the regular person, how long does it take you to cross the Atlantic? How long does that take?
Well, it depends where you start and where you finish because there's a lot of different start and finish points. It took us about 14 days to get from the US East Coast to the Virgin Islands. Actually, we had to make an emergency stop in Bermuda. So that's a lie. That wasn't nonstop, but it would have taken us. We crossed from Cape Verde to Bonaire, and that took us 27 days. And then the Pacific was a
Powerful. So the next question I have is, right, living with the level of fear while trapped on a small boat with your husband for weeks at a time. Did it ever push your marriage right to the edge of breaking?
never.
Never.
No, he's my hero and my idol, and I wouldn't live
Yeah.
life without him.
He seems like a real badass. I'd love to meet Dan one day. I can just
He's
picture him up on that boat with
hysterical.
the waves crashing, him just like, just bring it on, right?
Yeah.
It's so cool. So you had to face that fear, right? Not once, but over and over again. What was the
Mhm.
absolute darkest, most hopeless moment when you were convinced that you would never get past it?
I've learned to deal better with my fear, but I would say the worst incident that I thought possibly we would lose the boat was crossing the Pacific, and that just happened last September. There's something called Chinese fishing fleets, which are out in the ocean ravaging them.
Yeah,
They have these 60-mile long nets they put out there. They catch everything, whether it's whales or dolphins or sea turtles, they kill everything. And they have this fleet of
everything. Yeah,
boats where they process the fish and freeze it and take it. And they've got actually like slave labor on these boats. They're really very, very dangerous people. And we had just passed a fleet of them. And we actually had to turn on our engine to escape because they weren't slowing down or altering their course in their 200-foot boats, and they wouldn't acknowledge us on the radio or anything. But we know that they caught sections of the net free to get tangled and just leave them in the ocean. And boats have gotten caught on them. So sure enough, it was in the middle of the night and our boat came to a standstill and it was 20 knot winds and 10-foot waves. And it was like we hit bottom. But we're like, there's no way we're in thousands of feet of water. So we went running out on deck and we're looking around. Dad's like, there's something that has to be stuck on our rudder. So we hove to, which is where you turn the boat into the wind and you backwind one of the sails. So you just stay straight in and everything calms down and you just kind of float. And thank goodness the current was going with us. So we were still going in the right direction, but we just weren't sailing. So we went to bed and waited for daylight. And still, like, we woke up in the morning and there's still 9-foot waves. I'm like, Dan, you're not going under that boat to see what's down there. I'm not letting you into the ocean because I remembered that what happened with that dinghy that got cut free. I'm like, same deal. So he got, being the boat MacGyver that he is, he got out the boat hook and he extended it and he taped the GoPro to it and he could get it all the way under the boat and look at the rudder. And sure enough, there were like scrapes all over and something had been caught on our rudder. And we're pretty sure since we had just passed the Chinese fishing fleet that it was stuck there. And then during the night when we were hove to, there was enough motion and we weren't moving forward that it was able to unwrap and untangle.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it loosened our steering and it took out our autopilot.
Yeah, I was gonna say it must have done a lot of damage, right?
So the autopilot is huge because we don't self hand steer across oceans. I mean, if you wanted to do that, you'd have to have multiple people to take, 3 hours on, 3 hours off
Yeah, it shifts.
stuff. And our boat is so big that trying to hand steer in those types of ways is physically difficult. And since it loosened our steering, we couldn't even steer the boat well because all the cables were loosened. So we had to stay hove to, and he had to do his boat MacGyver thing, take the entire pedestal off, the wheel off, and we had to go down all the way through take the boards out of the beds and crawl all the way down to the back of the boat with great big wrenches and things and retighten our steering, which we didn't know if it was going to work. But the only way to tell was to put everything back together, put the wheel back on the pedestal. So it took us 8 hours to get the pedestal back on. And then he grabbed the wheel and he's, took it unhove too. He's like, oh, it works. It works. It's not perfect, but it works. So we knew we had steerage. So we didn't have to abandon ship because we would have had to abandon ship if we didn't have steerage. And then he went and tried the autopilot and the autopilot was dead. So we were just faced with, we have to just hand steer another 680 miles to get to the French Polynesians. And it was very challenging and very trying. And I think it was the most physically and mentally difficult thing, but I knew we were going to make it. It was just going to be really tough.
It's gonna be tough, yeah. So for the listeners, right? You're out in the ocean, right? And it's not like it's a car. It's not like your car breaks down, you call AAA, they come out and tow you, right? So if there's an
Right.
issue, right? If there's an issue in the middle of the ocean, so like you said, Dan's down there, right? And with the wrenches and trying to fix everything, right? And like, what does that entail? Do you guys have to make sure that you guys are, the ocean still, or is it just like we got to get down there? Are there waves crashing? What's it like? Is it
Well,
just all
we
sorts of craziness?
Well, we were hove to, which meant that we weren't, there was still motion in the boat, but it wasn't like a violent rocking. And it took two of us because we had to pull and tighten around the gears down there. So we're both down there. And every time the boat would rock, my hand would go up and scratch the cogs. And then, we were bloody when we came out. It
When
was,
you came
it was
out, yeah.
difficult, but and it was physically the hardest thing I think I've ever done because I had to have so much pressure on him for it to just get a millimeter of tightness. But we worked and we worked and we sweated and we grunted and swore and groaned. And when we figured we got it as tight as we could, we closed it all up. And to me, the physical things like that don't bother me at all. I'm a workhorse. You can push me to my limit physically and I won't say a word.
Yeah.
I will not complain. I will not cry. I will not give up. It's the mental part of it that I have the trouble with.
That you have the trouble with, yeah. But that says so much about the marriage that you two guys have, right? You and Dan. You're out in the middle of the ocean, the both of you still, hand in hand down below, underneath the boat, working together, right? Hand in hand doing that, right? It must be such an emotional attachment there, right? Between the two of you is that it's like, here we are. Some people can't even be in the room with their spouse, never mind
I know.
underneath the boat, fixing it, making sure, and it's just powerful. It's so cool. So back, right, and this isn't in my notes or questions, but back to the Chinese boats, right? If you don't mind talking about those quickly, right? I see them all the time, right? In certain shows that I watch on like Discovery and all that, and you see them, right? You'll see like the lobster fishery, the lobster guys up there in their boats, and you'll see the Chinese boats just come through and they rip. It seems like they don't give a shit about
Yeah.
anybody. They rip through people's nets, they rip through people's lines. And you were saying, right, they basically catch everything. And that goes for dolphins, that goes for turtles, that goes for whales,
Whales.
fish, right? So, and what do they do with all that stuff? They just kill it and throw it back in the ocean?
Yep. And they, there are certain rules. Like we were told that they had been caught in the Galapagos Islands, which are highly, highly protected. We had to make an emergency landing in the Galapagos Islands because we had some issues, and they
Yeah.
had to let us in. And the Chinese fishing fleet had been in their waters illegally, and they were caught, and they had 90 shark fins on board, which means they pulled the sharks up, cut off their fins, and just threw their bodies back into the water. But they took 90 of their protected sharks and cut their fins off. And,
Jeez.
thank God that group got caught. But literally, that was one of the scariest situations I had with another boat when we were crossing through their fleet. And I was calling their names. I could see their names, and I was calling them, and they wouldn't respond. And they're getting closer and closer. And Dan had to turn the engine on, and he had to floor it because we're under sail, going across them, and they had to give us right away, which they didn't. And I took a picture of the AIS, and it actually looks like their ship is T-boning our sailboat because they only crossed like 200 yards from us. But that's how close they came, is that the radar, the AIS actually showed the boats T-boning us.
Each other. So basically they don't play by the rules, right? These
Nope.
Chinese fish trawlers, they don't play by the rules. And also, like I think the big thing you said is depleting, right? Depleting the ocean of its sharks and turtles and stuff that they're not supposed to be catching, but they kept, like you said, they took the fins and throw them right back. It's
Yeah.
such a barbaric thing, right? And you think of it, the saddest thing is if they only caught one boat, just imagine how many boats got away with it.
Yeah. I know.
And I don't think they have regulations and stuff that, the Chinese, when they fish and all that. I mean, there's international regulations, I know that, but when it comes to the Chinese, I don't think they follow any of the rules when it
No,
comes
they
to
don't.
fishing.
And there's no police out there to catch them. There's nobody who's going to start an international incident over, taking on a Chinese fishing fleet of, 10 of these 200-foot boats.
Yeah,
Unless you have 10
yeah.
missiles on board.
Exactly. And that's how big they are, 200 feet, the
The
boats?
ones that this fleet was, I imagine that there's a lot of fleets out there. And what they're doing now is they're putting out these big circular domes in the ocean with the nets that drop down, or not nets, but things that drop down to lure the fish to come start schooling. And there's an AIS signal on that. So they put them out in the ocean, and then they come back later and they circle the entire pod with a large net, and then they just close it in, and they catch all of the life that has lived underneath that. Because the fish think, make their homes there because they think it's plants. So sailors and fishermen, and now when they go by and they see them, they get on top of it and they rip the AIS signals out of them so they can't find them.
And that's the only thing that we can do, right? To stop them. Like you said, the ocean, 80% of the world is water. So you can't have everybody everywhere at one place looking for these boats, and it's tough to find them. It's like finding a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
So the ocean, right, stripped away every illusion of control. When you realized you were completely powerless, what part of yourself did you meet for the very first time? And did you like her?
I haven't found her yet, but when I meet her, I will let you know. No, I just kind of have a different perspective on life now. I really have given up. As long as we're still alive, still in love, still afloat, it's all good. And that's my I've lowered my criteria for what I need to be happy. And if I have those three things, then it's all good. And I need to just learn to be braver. And I think I'm getting braver. I think so.
So, Alison, tell us about like a day-to-day life, right? When you guys get up in the morning, if you're out on the seas, right? What's that like? What's breakfast like? What's what's a daily routine like for you on the boat? You and Dan.
So it differs vastly whether we're on a passage or whether we're on land. So which one do you want me to describe?
When you're on passage, so when you're out there on passage, yeah.
So passage is a really unique time. It's a very quiet, very routine oriented day. So we take shifts during the night. Somebody has to be awake at all times to make sure that there's nothing on the radar, that everything is working well, that the sails are set correctly. So we played around a lot with the shifts because I'm not a night person. I just don't like being up at night. I'm afraid of the dark, so I don't even like to go up on deck when it's dark out. Everybody else is like doing ocean crosses, like, oh, did you see the stars and the constellation, the full moon? I'm like, no, I was pretty much hiding under the deck the whole time. But anyway, we tried 3 hours on, 3 hours off, just consistently. That didn't really work that well for me. And then we tried 2 hours on, 2 hours off, but that still just didn't give us enough sleep. So now I stay awake as long as I can, and it's maybe till 12, till 1. And then Dan will come up and he will stay up until like 4 or 5 in the morning, and then I'll get up at 5, and then he'll go back to bed. So that's what that looks like. So he doesn't eat breakfast anyway. He's not a breakfast person.
Yeah.
So breakfast isn't even a thing. And when we're on a passage, we maybe have 1 meal a day because you just don't feel like eating and you don't have that schedule where you wake up and you're expecting breakfast. It gets to noon and you expect lunch. So sometime between like 11 and 1, I'll make whatever meal I can depending on the sea state. And then we'll have like at happy hour time, we'll have a little snack and maybe some hors d'oeuvres, cheese and crackers, whatever. And then our night shift starts shortly after that. So it's like a very quiet time and there's a lot of napping during the day because that's when you can kind of catch up on your sleep.
So it's very routine.
Yeah, very.
Yeah. And so do the both of you guys get to nap during the day, or does somebody always have to be out?
No, during the day, I mean, I don't nap very much. It's mostly him that does the napping during the day because I'm not a nap person. But I could be down reading in my bed and he could be asleep. And during the day, it's okay because there's really not a lot that goes on. And even if you're checking once an hour, you're going to see on the AIS if there's anything around. And when you're in the middle of the ocean, you don't see anything. I mean, the fishing boats, the Chinese fishing fleet were the only thing we saw crossing the Pacific. I mean, there was just nobody out there.
Nobody out there, yeah.
So it really depends what part of the ocean you're crossing. I think when we left from Cape Verde to the Caribbean, we saw maybe one boat when we first started out. Didn't see anybody crossing that. I mean, just you're out there by yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. So for everybody that's listening on YouTube, you can see it right now, special guest Alison. If you click that, that's going to bring you directly to her page.
Cool.
So anybody that's listening on YouTube, you can click the link. It will bring you right to Alison's page. Alison's because you are also a writer.
I am.
You are. So, as being a teacher, right? And now you're a writer as well. So what do you write about? Let the listeners know some of the books that you have and what you write about.
So I did the first 3 years of our sailing journey called Riding the Waves of Reality. And that's what this looks like.
And where can people get that? They can get that on your webpage as well?
It's on AlisonGieschen.com. It's on Amazon. It's all over the place. So that's the first 3 years. And then we did Riding the Waves of Reality 2, Mediterranean Mayhem and Magic. And that's all about the Mediterranean. And I'm just getting ready to start the third memoir. So there's 2 of those out currently. I write children's books. A couple months ago, I published Sienna, which is a mermaid's tale. But since Dan and I are avid scuba divers, I put real sea life in the story. So it's an early reader chapter book, but they're learning about the sea creatures in the ocean and conservation and all kinds of stuff. And then I have a glossary that has real photos of the sea creatures and then facts about them. So the kids actually learn the teacher part of me.
That's awesome.
Dan is right now publishing the sequel. He's working on his computer on the other side of the boat, doing the cover design and formatting for Marlin, which is the boy version of my mermaid series, and it's called Marlin, and it should be coming out on April 1st.
April 1st.
And then,
so everybody keep keep it open. April 1st, Merlin.
And then I have a book that just won the Silver Medal Award for a book contest reader views, and it's a fictional book. I picked 7 characters from around the world, and those were chosen from a pool of humanity to decide the fate of humanity. If the majority of them appreciated the gifts of the earth, humanity would be saved. If they didn't, it was going to be wiped out and started all over again. And each of the characters comes from a different, unique culture around the world, and they all have some special meaning to me, either the person or the place, and they're all highly researched. So when you read about the character, you learn the real facts about the history of their cultures and where they live and their environments, and a lot of really fun facts. Because I had a horse farm, it's not humans or God that are judging them. It is horses. So each human has an encounter with a horse, and that horse judges them. And this came to me in a dream. Like, unfortunately, even though I'm still on the boat, I take care of horses all night long in my dreams. I have to feed them and water them, and it drives me crazy. And they're all horses I know. So one night I had this dream, and it was horses I didn't know, and it was a very unusual environment in this dream, and it was very realistic. And I discovered they were looking inside my soul, and they could decide if I was a good person or I was not a good person. And I woke up and I said, Dan, this was the most extraordinary dream I've ever had. I have to write a book about it. So the 7 was an inspiration from a dream I had.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So we're going to give you a little bit of clapping. That's powerful. The ocean's so powerful. I know you just said you guys are scuba divers, right? So I was in, where was I? Was I in the Bahamas, Bermuda, Bahamas maybe? And we went on a snorkeling. We went snorkeling and we hopped in and there's sea turtles. And, there was one right there when we got off. So everybody stays there. And I spent my summers down Cape Cod, right? I was lucky enough. My grandmother and grandfather had a summer place. And when I tell
Hmm.
you we were right on the water, it was right on the water. I spent my
Wow.
summers swimming and swimming and swimming and swimming. I love swimming. So, I take off and I don't follow anybody. And I find a big sea turtle and I follow it for like a good 8 or 9 minutes, right? And just following the sea turtle. I didn't approach it. I just stayed above it. And then when it would go to the surface, I would just, go aside. But it was this powerful moment I had, right? When the sea turtle sort of realized I wasn't going to touch it, I wasn't going to bother it, that it just did its thing, right? It just did its thing. It felt that it was going to be safe. And, it was one of the most powerful things of just swimming with that sea turtle for a good 9 minutes, right? And then I was in same trip. He swam with the sharks. No cage, no nothing. There was 29 of us on the boat. The guy looks at us. He said, and you see him. He starts dropping the bait box down about 30 feet, and he says, "Who wants to go in?" And we're all looking, and you can see the sharks coming. And there's two of us. We raise our hands, and so I go in, and I'm on the top looking, and all of a sudden, this shark comes by and brushes my leg.
Wow.
The guy says to us at this point, the boat of get the hell out of the water. And I say to him, I get onto the boat and I say to him, why do I get out of the water? Like these sharks don't bite. And he goes, "What do you mean they don't bite? They're freaking sharks." And I go, "Yeah, they're nurse sharks or whatever, the bottom feeders." I'm like, "Yeah, they're not going to bite." He goes, "No, these, I think they were black tipped coral reef sharks."
Oh,
And he was
okay.
like, "Yeah, they bite." And I'm like, he said, "You didn't read your contract?" And for me, I do union work. I'm executive vice president of my union. So I'm always, when people get in trouble and with company stuff, I read it from front to back, right? And I was on vacation. This was the first time I never read a
You
contract in
didn't
my
look
life.
at it.
And right in there, it says you can be bit by sharks. And I'm sort of glad I didn't read it because I probably wouldn't have went in the water. But I'm glad I went, and it was that was one of the most powerful experiences I ever had of being that close to sharks. And one rubbing next to brushing up against me, and it started circling me. So he was like, "Yeah, you got to get out of the water." But it was so
Yeah.
powerful. I can only imagine the things that you and Dan see out on the ocean. It must be powerful.
Yeah, we swam with sharks in the Galapagos. Those hammerhead sharks, schools of them, and it was fantastic.
Yeah,
Absolutely
that was one of
fantastic.
my aunt and I was talking, she was watching something on hammerheads and I was saying that's I think it's Bahamas down in Bimini. Bimini, I think, where they have a lot of hammerheads as well. I want to swim with a hammerhead so bad.
Yeah. Well, go to the Galapagos. It's you need to get your scuba certification.
Yeah, yeah. So what was that like swimming with the hammerheads? How were they?
They're not feeding. They're just going with the flow and the currents. And the Galapagos are some of the most unique one of the most unique places on the planet because it has all these currents converging and it brings in all the pelagics, the big species of fish and creatures. And there's so many endemic species there. They're not found anywhere else on the planet. So it's like stepping back in time when you go
In
there.
time, yeah.
And it's an incredible, incredible experience. And it's not an easy dive. The water's cold, the currents are strong, and you're not necessarily going to have good visibility. But when you get down there, you realize that you are seeing some of the most primal looking environments that's left on this planet. And it's just a really cool feeling.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Did you ever think that you'd be after all them years teaching and owning the horse farm and all that, you ever think you'd be down there seeing all that?
No, no, this is still like a dream to me.
So cool. It's so cool. So 8 years later, right? You're still out there. The fear never magically disappeared. So tell us the raw truth. How do you sail through a storm now when the same terror is still sitting in your chest?
I guess, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And we aren't in that many storms. We're really not
Yeah.
because we leave when the good weather is good, when it's a time of year when you're supposed to be sailing. And usually if it's a bad weather, we're at anchor or in a marina. I think the worst storm that we were ever in was in Spain, Atuana, and we had 66-mile-an-hour winds whipping through the marina, and people's boats were in slips around the marina where the sails were ripping, pulling out of the mast, and the boats were tipping over. And here I am just praying that nothing gets destroyed on our boat. And my husband leaves the boat and starts going and rescuing other people's boats. And I'm like, "Come back." And he was just gone. And this one boat was actually tipped over because the sail had come out. The sail had filled with air and it was laying sideways on the deck, threatening to take out the dock and the other boats. And two guys had rushed over there and they couldn't figure out how to get the line loosened to release the pressure on the sail. And Dan's just like, "Oh, you're doing it wrong. You got to do it this way." And in 5 minutes, he got it undone. And then I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, thank God, he's going to come back." So the boat rights, these guys are working on wrapping the sail up. And then the boat right behind him, a catamaran, wind had filled into their sail cover and started ripping that off. And it was going to take the whole sail out next. So he runs onto that boat and starts another one. And I'm like, "Oh God, I can't win." But anyway, we survived. He saved about 3 boats that day, and yeah, he's like the ocean MacGyver.
I was gonna say, Dan. Dan. It sounds like wherever Dan is, right? As long as Dan's on that boat, you're good. You're good to go.
He's
Right?
saved us from sinking twice now. Twice we've been sinking, and he's saved us.
So you've visited nearly 50 countries, right? After the trauma, was there one
Actually,
moment on land, looking back at the sea, when you thought, "I almost let fear steal all of this away"?
yes, I think about that every day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's embarrassing, really.
No, it's not. I don't think it's embarrassing. I think it's just, it's human nature, right? To be out on the ocean, but just you and Dan in your boat, right? I think it's just human nature. You rather be on land, right? It's similar to being on an airplane, right? Just imagine if you were on an airplane for 14 days straight. You'd be worried too.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate the fact that I'm still out here, and that as long as we're still alive, still in love, and still afloat, it's all good. So that's my only
Yeah.
three prerequisites at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like it's been magical. So what did this journey do to your faith? Did the ocean make you believe more fiercely, or did it make you question everything you thought you knew about God and protection before?
No, it definitely tripled my faith. I've had so many amazing signs that just are just undeniable that I can't,
Yeah.
like I said, it's undeniable at this point that this is not my journey. It's his journey, and I'm just really blessed to be part of it.
Yeah. Hey, just in the driver's seat, right? I mean, just in the passenger seat, right? Just
Passenger
along for the
seat,
ride.
yep.
Yeah, just along for the ride. So courage, right? Courage for you is no longer the absence of fear. So define it for us right now. What does real courage look like when you're still scared every single day?
Just having the will to know that it's okay to be afraid. It's just that you need to manage it, and you need to set your priorities and live with it and not let it decide your fate or take over you. You have to learn to say, "Okay, I have fear issues, but that's okay."
Yeah. Yeah. And as long as Dan's right there, you're good, right?
Yep. That moment he goes overboard, I'm going with him.
So if you could go back, right, to that terrified teacher standing on the dock before the first crossing, what one brutal truth would you scream at her?
That it's a lot worse than you ever imagined during the tough times, but it is way more beautiful than you ever imagined at the really good times.
Yeah. I can only imagine. Like, do you guys take pictures and all that stuff when you're out there?
Oh, I'm an avid photographer, and I have a blog, sailmates.org. So every place that we pull into, I photograph it. I write stories about the history of the places and the people that are here. And so I do stories and pictures of everything. And I do them daily on my like Instagram and Facebook pages. So when we take a walk and we go through the village, or we go and have dinner with a family who has invited us into their home, I take pictures and write stories of everything. So every day there's something, whether it's a view from our boat, us sitting there on the, sometimes we'll just take our chairs and go put them up on the bow and watch the sunset and have a beer. And, I take a picture of that. Or if a manta ray comes swimming by our boat, I'll jump over and take a few pictures of the manta ray swimming by us. So whatever's going on, you can see pictures of it daily on my Instagram and Facebook.
And on Sailmates as well, right?
Well, Sailmates is the blog, so it's got the pictures embedded in the stories and the blog posts. But my social media is where I post daily. And I don't really do it for me. I do it because I have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. And my grandkids call me and know exactly where I am because I gave them all a map of the world to put on their bedroom wall. And they can put a pin in every country. And I send them this accordion folding postcard every time we get to a new country, and it shows the pictures, and it shows us on our boat and what creatures are there, and it gives them facts about it, and they put a pin in that spot. So the other day, my daughter was talking to me, and I was FaceTiming, and my 3-year-old grandson says, "I know where you are," and the map of the world, he runs over and he points to the French Polynesias, and he goes, "Manta rays live there." So at 3 years old, he could look, how many adults do you know they could walk up at a map of the world and point out where French Polynesia is?
Not many.
So they live vicariously through us, which is why I take so much time to document it and show the pictures because I want them to be able to see where I am at any given time.
That's awesome. So, for everybody listening on YouTube, there's a link right there. That's for sailmates.org. You can go on and check her out. Check out the journey that she's on. That's her blog. You know, it's so powerful what you're doing, Allison. It's
Thank
super
you.
cool too. It's super cool, right? To even just give up everything and just go, live your life, right? Just to give it up. It's so powerful.
Yeah, it's a definitely an experience that not many people ever get to have, and life is so much powerful when you don't have a job, you don't have a car, you don't have distractions, you don't have the phone ringing. You're living every moment, and everything is such a cool experiences without life pulling you in so many different directions. You just appreciate everything so much more.
So much more. So for listeners, right now, who are in their own violent storm, whether it's trauma, fear, or a life that's breaking them, what is the one thing you wish someone had told you in your lowest moment?
I guess I really like the words that my mentor said is that you've been through the worst of it and you're going to be fine. If you can just hang on and get through, you get stronger every time something happens to you. And if you learn to build on that resilience, it's going to make you more prepared and it's going to hurt a lot less the next time something traumatic comes up because you already made it through once. You're going to be fine.
Gonna be just fine. Just fine. So, looking at the woman you are today, right, versus the woman who almost quit after that first storm, who actually won? The fear or you?
Me,
No doubt about it.
I won.
No doubt about it. And you're winning every day. Every day you get up, every day you set sail, every day, you're at dock, every day you wake up, you're winning. So last question, right? Allison, I want to thank you for coming on. If tomorrow another storm came that made the first one look like nothing, would you still choose this life? Or has the price of courage finally become too high?
No, as long as I have my 3 criteria when that storm passes, that we're still alive, still in love, still afloat, there's really nothing that's gonna make me quit at this point.
That's awesome. Allison, I appreciate you coming on, sharing your journey. Just let people know before we go, right, where they can find you. I know I put the links up, sailmates.org. They can find the book at Amazon. So just run it down before I give my closing.
Okay, so if you type in Alison Gieschen author on Amazon, it lists all my books, and I have AlisonGieschen.com, which is my author website, and it has stories behind the stories and all links to all of my books. And sailmates.org is my blog post site with my longer stories, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram.
So Allison, you didn't just sail around the world. You sailed straight through hell and came out the other side still standing. You proved that fear doesn't get to write the final chapter of our lives unless we hand it the pen. You showed every single listener that courage isn't the absence of terror. It's waking up afraid, feeling the panic in your chest, and choosing to raise the sails anyway. You've given us living proof that when life rips away every illusion of control, it's not punishing us, it's remaking us into people who are unbreakable. So, to every person listening right now who's in their own storm, hundreds of miles from the life they thought they wanted, your fear doesn't disqualify you, it qualifies you. Keep moving forward. The horizon you're terrified to chase is the one that's going to set you free. Allison, thank you for refusing to let fear decide the course of your life and for reminding all of us that we still have the same choice today. Fear wins, my friend. This was more than an interview. This was a masterclass in what real resilience looks like.
Thank you for
Thank you so
having
much,
me.
Allison. Thank you.